I personally can't hitch my wagon to feminism because the word's corrupted. You think about things that have happened under the umbrella of feminism that have been so bad for women. And just one of the things is the birth control pill. And actually, I was just reading this Danish study of women 15 to 34. Women who are on hormonal contraceptives were 50% more likely to be diagnosed with depression 6 months later compared with women who are not. They also found that women who are on hormonal contraceptives were 40% more likely to be prescribed an antidepressant than women who were not. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Ancient Intelligence. You've got your host, Anya Shack here. And today I want to get into a conversation about what submission and having a higher vision between a man and woman really has to do with each other. And to start that off, I want to talk a little bit about the misunderstandings of feminism and specifically the word and how it's led us astray in a big way. And so, just to get right into it, I was listening to Holly Lawford Smith, who's an Australian author. She just wrote a book called Feminism Beyond Left and Right. And her big argument is that, the assumption that feminism is a left-wing thing is only something that left-wing women can identify with is false. And there's actually like a great deal of feminism that exists on the right wing. And I thought that was interesting. Bear with me here. I thought that was interesting because she goes on then to say that, for her, the definition of feminism is, having the best interests of women at heart, right? Which is very interesting because that's how I've always defined like what I want to do here, right? I want the best interests of women at heart, like what's good for women. Like let's answer that. What's good for women? And then side by side along with that, we have to answer what's good for men. You have to do that side by side, right? And so upon listening to her talk, it became very clear that feminism isn't defined that way. What's good for women, right? Because if it were, there would be so many things that have happened in the last 40, 50, 60 years that couldn't have happened. Because if you ask, are they good for women? The answer is no, they are not good for women. When we think about the definition of feminism, it's complete chaos because some people think it's okay, what's in the best interests of women? Some people think it's complete and total equality with men, right? And interestingly enough, if we have a movement that's called, let's call it what's in the best interest of women. And if we were to even call it feminism, then we have to have a movement for men, right? And would we call it masculinism? And that's actually something that I have read before. When I first got into like the mythopoetic men's movement in the 80s and what Robert Bly was doing with his men's groups and going out into the forest and kind of domesticating men and having them wake up to who they are, a lot of what they talked about was called masculinism. Now, I really like that. If that's how it was, fine. But that's unfortunately not the definition of feminism. That's not what people take it to mean. And it's just really been disrupted and it's not good. So I personally can't use that word anymore. And so when we think about the reason that we can't use that word before is because it's tainted. And so if you think about, okay, what is good for women, you can't call it feminism. You think about things that have happened under the umbrella of feminism that have been so bad for women. And just one of the things is the birth control pill. One of them is the birth control pill. There's so many other ones. And actually, I was just reading this Danish study that I'm going to read off here. Danish study of women 15 to 34. Women who are on hormonal contraceptives were 50% more likely to be diagnosed with depression 6 months later compared with women who are not. They also found that women who are on hormonal contraceptives were 40% more likely to be prescribed an antidepressant than women who were not. That's one big thing, right? So it's really interesting. I personally can't hitch my wagon to feminism because the word's corrupted, right? So I love talking about women's interests. Love talking about women's interests because alongside women's interests, we can talk about men's interests and it doesn't get heated, hopefully. And so Holly Lawford Smith was mentioning, and the reason I kind of wanted to get into this was because she was saying like, oh, okay, well, because feminism can be right wing too. And again, in her mind, feminism is what's in the best interests of women. Then Phyllis Schlafly is also a feminist, technically, right? Which is quite interesting because I imagine Phyllis Schlafly would have hated to be called a feminist because her entire MO was anti-feminist, right? It was anti the Equal Rights Amendment. And if y'all don't know, so Phyllis Schlafly was this woman. She was an American woman, married to a lawyer, very much involved in the politics of the late 60s, 70s. She campaigned against the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. She said that it would strip away like protection for women. It would take away the exemption from the draft. It would take away traditional family roles. She was right. And she had this line that she would say, like, we don't need girls in foxholes, which is really interesting. And so she was someone that campaigned in this way. And I find her to be super fascinating because she did delay the ratification of the ERA for a while. Because of all of her work, she mobilized a lot of housewives. She mobilized a lot of women to say, we don't want this. And she had this movement. It was also called Stop ERA, which was like, and stop stood for stop taking our privileges. And it's super interesting that her big argument was against the draft. And what I was reading about is how Gloria Steinem, big woman in the movement in the 60s of the feminism, she would basically say, we want equality, not exemption. So she was pretending like she wanted women to be drafted. But the truth is just like in the 1800s, when women were asked, the suffragettes were asked the same thing, they would say, like, we don't want anyone to be drafted, right? That's the thing that always ended up happening when women wanted the exact same things as men, right? They wanted the privileges without the responsibility. And then Schlafly was arguing, like, we as women have these really important privileges, don't take them away from us, which I think was really meaningful. And what's also interesting was that Steinem also used to say Schlafly was living proof that a woman can do anything while telling us we shouldn't. It's fascinating. I think that point is really key to zero in on here because it's just prime marketing. Schlafly wasn't rowing a boat across the Atlantic. She wasn't competing in men's sports. She wasn't like she was literally speaking her mind and she was speaking her truth and what mattered to her, right? This was something that mattered to her. All throughout history, women have had the right to speak up, to speak out, right? Especially when they have a husband that is aligned with them. And so one thing that I think is really interesting, and this is kind of me moving into the submission part of this video, one thing that made everyone cringe is that every time she would come out on stage, Phyllis Schlafly, she would thank her husband for letting her be there. Okay. She would thank her husband for letting her be there, and it would make everyone else cringe. It was like her trolling all the feminists. And even when people hear this now, they cringe. And I actually find this to be quite honorable and respectful. And let me tell you why. I watched another video this week that I thought was lovely. A friend sent it to me. It was this like pastor's wife, but also a pastoress, I guess is what we'll call her. She had this really beautiful video where she was preaching about submission. And she talked about how everyone misunderstands submission as a woman. Sub means to be beneath as a helper, and mission is self-explanatory, right? Mission. You're not submitting to nothing. You are submitting to a mission. You are an important helper in some sort of mission, right? And I think that's really interesting that it's not just like one man that wants to do whatever he wants to do, and then one woman who wants to do something completely different, and then they get together and all chaos ensues, which is actually what happens now. But if you really think about the more intentional, deep understanding of partnership and how I view it and how I see it and how I think is very beautiful and how God also intended it for it to be, it's that the man has this mission in his life, right? And a woman also has a mission in her life, but her mission is connected to his. And I think that if women actually cut the birth control pills, cut all the unnatural products, cut all the obsession with, their physical appearance and just tuned into themselves, nature, God, women's circles, good women that really want their best interests at heart, that are deep and intuitive, they would understand that it's almost like the type of man that any woman is drawn to aligns to her mission, right? It's almost like her mission is to help his mission. And if she can only see that, and she can only see that, like, God has given man a mission, and then he has given woman a complementary role in fulfilling that mission with him, there's this, like, it's like one couple, one mission. I've talked about this in another video. It's like everywhere you see two people trying to run up two different mountains, whereas the only way it will work is if there are two people running up one mountain. And so I say this is a great example that Phyllis Schlafly didn't just like, all right, I'm just gonna, make this a thing in my life and just focus on this because I want to and it's important and I love women. Maybe her love of women and her desire to see women's best interests um, maintained is it's almost like a secondary thing to the larger mission. Her husband, Fred Schlafly, wealthy corporate lawyer, staunch conservative. He worked as a successful attorney in Illinois. He specialized in antitrust law. He was very conservative, very involved in right-wing politics himself. And so for him, like his mission was clearly to, you know, maintain the status quo and maintain traditional gender norms. And maybe she was more charismatic and she was more fit for the stage. I actually was reading him. He's kind of more of a quiet dude. And he was just kind of in the background and always supporting her. And so because her her mission effectively complemented his mission. They weren't separate. And so for her to get up on stage and say, thank you to my husband for allowing me to be here, it actually just reflects her respect for him, and it reflects their joint mission in this life, right? If a woman can be intuitive enough and to be drawn into and attracted to a man where she can share and collaborate in his big vision and his mission, that's the whole point. And let's back up here for a second. For most of history, what was people's mission? What was people's joint mission? Survival. Then agriculture happened. Okay, now we need enough kids so that we can work the land. Survival and procreation, survival and procreation. Once we started getting richer and richer, we were able to unlock more leisure time, unlock more of a personal sense of identity, right? We are very lucky that we get to do that and find fulfillment in this way. And so there's something really beautiful to this like one couple, one mission thing. And the only way that will work is if a woman submits. So sub under mission, submission, she participates in submission with her man. That's the only way that that will work. I know an amazing couple. I'm going to a retreat with this woman and a couple of women in Australia in a couple of weeks, and she helps women come alive to their feminine leadership and their feminine energy in a way that is really deep and meaningful. And her husband, he does the same thing for men. He leads men's retreats in the forest for hundreds of men at a time. They have a joint mission together, right? The Eldridges, I talk about them all the time, right? He wrote Wild at Heart. She wrote Captivating for Women. They have this mission together, right? The Hermoses, right? Her entire life's purpose was submitting to Alex's vision for his life and for their life, right? And so she is submitting, she participates in his mission with him in the ultimate way, right? And so I think that's super, super interesting. And it just I love just thinking about it that way. And I want to encourage and inspire others to think about it that way? Could you imagine if, teenagers completely had a change of mindset and change of heart and the way that things have been going, and they completely went 180 and their whole mental state was about, how can I partner with the opposite sex? Like, how as a woman am I going to live in submission to my man and his vision and his mission? Maybe, yeah, maybe as a woman, I'm the more charming one in the scenario. Maybe I'm the one that needs to be more public and more vocal in whatever it is that we choose to do. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe as a woman, I don't want to do that. Right? Maybe he's the more charming and the more vocal one. Maybe we just build houses in the woods and we sell them, right? What does that look like? There's so much richness for thinking about it in this way. And last thing that I want to say is like, there's just such a big lie that has been perpetuated in with women, and women are so mimetic, way more so than men. Women are way more inclined to groupthink than men. That's why I think so much happens so quickly with feminism that like people are just like, whoa. I just think women are they're more gullible in many ways, and yeah, it's really interesting. There is a distinct difference between men and women in that women typically don't like when their friends disagree with them. And there's distance that's created, whereas men disagree with each other all the time. That's part of how they do life, right? So it's an interesting difference. And some woman was like posting about how, she had a baby, and then she was talking about how I shouldn't be forced to put my child first over my career. And I was just yelling. Oh, I was just yelling. I was like, you literally actually have to do that. You actually have to do that. That is the only way things will work, And it's just such an insane thing that's going on that it just makes me so upset as someone that really wants to be a mother one day. It just frustrates me to no end. And I was just reading this, a couple of things, two things that I think are really meaningful to know as we think about motherhood and how much more pedestalized it should be and how much more important it should be. And I think men have always known how important motherhood is. That's why they've done everything in their power to protect women from war and from all these other difficult things so that women could just focus on motherhood, which is just what most great men have done. And all of the narratives about like, oh, women and all their oppression and all of that. Sure, that's happened. And sure, it's probably mostly the top 4% aristocracy ruler class that has done all of the oppressing, right? Average guys just went to work so that their wives could stay home and, do the things that only women can do. Speaking of, when a baby is fighting an illness or infection, signals from the baby's spit enter the mother's breast, triggering her immune system to produce agents in her milk that help the baby combat the infection. From the book Eve, How the Female Body Drove 200 Million Years of Human Evolution by Kat Bohannon. Like, to even be considering crazy fake wombs and like doing all of the, like putting tech into this incredible natural human process is insane. That is where I am anti-progress, right? Like, fine, make your cars cooler, make your trains more fast, change the planes, like progress all the way on that. But when it touches the human body, I am like vehemently against that when it's not to like help a sick person, right? Like when you're trying to like give medicine to someone sick or dying, like progress. I support that. But when you're trying to do something that is naturally working for hundreds and thousands of years, like I cannot. Number two, I was reading about this when I was doing research, how babies actually learn to speak. Language is something that mothers and babies make together. It's dependent on the relationship between mother and child in those first 3 to 5 critical years. Dads can participate, but they generally don't, especially during those times when it's baby on mother's skin, right? It's a long, unbroken chain of mothers and babies has kept language going since the beginning. And I was reading how, you know, sex egalitarian societies are just rare, like almost non-existent. So this idea of like we're egalitarian, we are not. Okay? Unless signals from a baby's spit can enter a father's breast and then his immune system can produce agents and milk to feed a baby, unless that is true, like we're not egalitarian. I'm like so heated today. Oh my gosh. But it's just not we are not egalitarian. We are equal in dignity and meaning, and we deserve that dignity and meaning. Both of us, what's in the best interests of women and men is what I am always focused on this show, but we are not egalitarian. The mother-child dyad is the most important communicative pairing of most mammalian species. Super important. All of this is important. Everything I just talked about. I love the bit about submission and Phyllis Schlafly and why the word feminism just won't work anymore. And that's it. Hope y'all have enjoyed this one. Hello, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I'm so happy to be here bringing my wisdom, my truths, all the research I do into pop culture and evolutionary psych and beyond to bring men and women the information that we all need to know to find that ultimate harmony with each other. This is the mission. This is why I'm here. This is what I believe in. So if you found value in what I'm doing here, please help me grow the podcast. And you can do one of two things. Either share the episode with a friend or leave me a review on Spotify or Apple. This will help me so much. Until next time.